So I've had the signal from Fred, so we're live now. So very, very warm welcome. People are flooding in. So I'm Subhadramati, and I'm here, as it were, with Subhuti, who I'll introduce more fully shortly. And yes, so people are already saying hello in the chat box. So I'll just see who we've got. So do introduce yourselves, especially if you're new to the London Buddhist Centre or the London Buddhist Centre live stream. But also if you're old as well, of course, you can introduce yourselves. So I see lots and lots of regulars. Nina from New York, I think, has been here every week.
Good. She's here every time, yeah.
Yeah, Nina again. Yeah, Amy from Berlin.
Yes, she's
been
there every night.
And then people more locally, but real regulars, Jill from the Barbican, real regular. Someone from Belgium. Virginia from Belgium. Peter, hi Peter from Stockholm.
Good.
Oh, somebody's saying something very nice about my book. Thank you, Amy. Who else? Gosh, it's all coming in so fast. I can't read them all. Virya Bodhi from Sweden.
Virya Bodhi, good. Hello, Virya Bodhi.
Yeah. Sue and Jane from Brixton. Hi there. Great. Yeah, keep letting us know where you're from. Very special evening tonight. Good. Who else is here? Sophia from Hackney. Rob. Oh, Liz from Tasmania, Australia. That's amazing.
Oh, yes.
That's great. I'm going to Australia next week, as it were, to give a talk at midnight my time. Brian, real regular. Nice to see you, Brian. Brian, a real stalwart team member when we're open. Oh, and someone from the Netherlands, Maggie from Dublin. Great, gosh.
Good. Yeah.
Julianne from Ireland as well. Oh, and somebody, the teacher from Mexico.
Oh, muy bien. Bienvenido.
Wonderful. Good. So let's see how many. Can I see how many people are with us already? Can't quite see how many.
63.
63. Oh, it's going up by the second though. Good. Great. Good. Oh, someone from Vancouver. Is that? Yeah, Meta from Vancouver. That's great.
Yeah.
Really, really good. So good. So welcome, everyone, and there'll be people joining us all the time. But as it's 7 o'clock now, I really want to welcome us to this very, very, very special evening. It's special in a whole number of ways. Well, it's special because we have Subhuti here with us for the 5th of the evenings on these 5 essentials. But what makes it particularly significant is it's the 2nd anniversary of when Bhante passed away, when Bhante died. So I must admit, I feel very privileged to be here on this evening, to be part of the evening, where in the second part of the evening, we're going to be ritually marking this, hugely significant event that we're, in a way, the meaning of probably unfolds to us all more and more when we're marking the passing away, at least in his physical form, of our teacher, Bhante. And Subhuti is going to be leading us in a ritual to mark that. And that's going to be at 8:20 this evening. And in the first part of the class, that will be, if you've been tuning in on the other evenings, that'll be more or less as usual. It'll be a little bit shorter to allow time for the ritual in a moment I'll more fully introduce Subhuti, and then we'll have a little mini meditation to begin. And then I'll ask him about the stage of spiritual rebirth. And then there'll be a little break, and then there'll be a chance for you to ask your questions. So all that will happen, and that'll take us up until 8:15. Then there'll be 5 minutes, and yeah, then our very, very special ritual. So, so lovely to welcome you, Subhuti. I was delighted to have the chance to do this, and it's really lovely to welcome you from your shrine room as well at Maes Gwyn, where you live. And I spent many hours in that shrine room with you when you've invited the whole LBC Council to come on retreat with you there. We've had, I think, 3 of those retreats so far. And I think it's true to say they've been some of the happiest times of my whole life, is spending time at Maes Gwyn with Subhuti on sort of Dharma holidays, which are meditation, Dharma study, walks through the mountains where I'm always trailing along behind Subhuti, leading the way up the mountain. And then watching films in the evening. Subhuti's already been talking about his love of film earlier in the week. So yeah, lovely to sort of be, as it were, in that shrine room at Maes Gwyn, where we've had many meditations and rituals together. And yeah, lovely to welcome you, Subhuti. And you've been so rejoiced in this week as a friend to the London Buddhist Centre, as a friend in places all around the world, especially India, of course, also in Hungary, as a personal friend to so many, including myself. You know, for so many years, I benefited from the friendship of Subhuti. Earlier, Subhuti was talking about taking seriously what our teachers say to us, and definitely Subhuti is someone who I take seriously what he says to me, very seriously indeed. So I too want to add my rejoicings to Subhuti as a friend. And I wanted to say just one extra thing. I was thinking, what can I say that hasn't been said? And I thought what I'd like to say is that, Subhuti, you're really someone who practices what you preach. You give us these wonderful talks that really inform our personal practice, definitely inform our teaching here at the London Buddhist Centre. But you're practicing it yourself. I think the teaching that I really have seen you embody is the whole teaching of, you've mentioned it a few times this week, of not seeing, when difficult things occur, not seeing those as setbacks or obstacles, but actually they are the path. And Subhuti, I really think that you do that. You make these into the path. Say this situation we're in with a pandemic, you've made this into the path. And I've seen you do that many times. And well, I think that is a quality that makes you trustworthy as a friend and teacher. That's what you want to see in your friend and your teacher, isn't it? You want to see them practicing what they preach, teach. And you really, really do that, Subhuti. So I'm delighted to be here with you tonight. And I want to mention, I want to say this at the beginning and the end and the middle, that we are collecting dana for Subhuti all this week. And so this evening really is your last chance to contribute dana to Subhuti. Really, when we say dana to Subhuti, it's dana to Subhuti's work in India, in Hungary, and all sorts of places. So I think the link will be put up in the chat box now and then again later. And please do give. As I say, this is really the last chance to do that. So don't hold back. And it will really help Subhuti in his work. We've raised quite a lot already, but let's raise even more this evening. So, Subhuti, I'm going to hand over to you now, just to lead us in a little meditation to set the scene for our evening.
Once again, hearing Subhadramati, and thank you very much for that introduction, Subhadramati. When I heard her reading out names of people arriving, as it were, into this virtual space, I'm so impressed and delighted that we've got people from such a diverse range of places. I'm particularly impressed by the Australians, goodness knows what time of day it is for them, but that they're here is really wonderful. The Mexicans from New York, from Vancouver, from continental Europe, and so on. It's really great, and really good too that people are here from Bow, nearer at home. But it is one of the features of this this strange situation of lockdown or semi-lockdown, where we're completely locked down in Wales, that in a curious way we can sometimes really meet, really touch. And that's presumably why you all keep coming back, because when we're together in this space, our minds touch each other. So in our meditation today, I'm just going to ask you to reach out, as it were, with your mind to the minds of all those who are assembled here through this medium of the internet. So just settle yourself down. Let go of wherever you've come from, whatever's preoccupying you, if anything. And just become aware that maybe 100, maybe more people are focusing their awareness in the same mental space. We're all touching each other through this medium. And many people from London, from the UK, from Ireland, Sweden, Belgium, maybe more, I haven't heard. Mexico, New York, Vancouver. But all sharing in the same focus of attention. So when you're ready, you can open your eyes and bring your attention back to this screen, which is just a metaphor for our meeting. It hasn't got any reality. What seems to appear there is mentally constructed. But our minds really do meet through that metaphor. So bring your attention back to the metaphorical world that the screen depicts. But let's try to retain some sense of us all gathered here. And I'll hand back to Subhadramati.
Thank you, Subhuti. And yeah, lovely to be led in that connection with each other. Just to say there's people from India here as well.
Oh.
I knew you'd be pleased about that. Let's see.
Jai Bhim. Priya Bhayo Beno, Jai Bhim.
From India. Sushant Singh from Uttar Pradesh.
Ah. Bodacha.
Yeah, maybe more. Yeah.
Swagat.
Yeah. Mm. Good. So yes. So tonight we come to our fifth evening of exploring what we've called the 5 essentials, the 5 stages of the path, 5 aspects of the path. And I really remember, Subhuti, just the excitement when, I don't know how long ago it was, maybe 8 years ago or 6 years ago, you were here in the shrine room upstairs on your rambles, and you were rehearsing with us the whole idea that what we had thought of previously as stages, sequential, one built on the other, actually could be a mandala of practice. And I just remember how that changed everything for us. It changed everything in our personal practice. It changed everything in our teaching, not just at the London Buddhist Centre, but in our whole order and movement. And later, those ideas that you were sharing with us became some of your papers that you wrote with Bhante. But yeah, just this notion of a mandala, it just meant that, I think previously we thought, okay, you've got to have the first one all perfect before you can go on to the next one, etc., etc. But what you said then and what you've drawn out this week is that, well, each of these is a path in itself, that they could all be present at every moment of our lives, ideally. At the same time, you have to practice all of them. Again, when I think of a mandala, I think of a lotus opening. You have to have the whole thing open, or else it's going to be a sort of lopsided lotus. So you've been drawing all that out all week. And now we come to spiritual rebirth. Yeah. And I thought, well, first of all, I'll just ask you to say, in a nutshell, if that's possible, well, what is the gist of spiritual rebirth? Last night we had spiritual death. What's spiritual rebirth?
Yes. Well, although these 5 do form a mandala, they also are a sequence. So if you think of a lotus opening, a lotus also grows. So that both characters are there. And really the stage of spiritual rebirth is the final flowering of that full lotus, even though all of those aspects have been present at every stage. So you asked me for a nutshell definition of spiritual rebirth. Well, I'll give you one, but it may not satisfy you, which is spiritual rebirth is what happens when you have spiritual death. If you die to the attachment, to the idea of a separate self, then something else can begin to flourish through you. Something that is more than you, something that is not you, but at the same time is not you. It's not somebody else. It's not being possessed by some ghost or something like that, or some spirit, or even some god. But it's a transcendence of the very distinction between self and other. So it's what can take place once you get out of the way.
Okay, and great, thank you. And what would characterize it when you say it's something else and what can take place? What does take place?
Well, behind your left shoulder is what takes place. Enlightenment emerges eventually, at least from the point of spiritual death and the effective or real spiritual death and the real emergence of spiritual rebirth. A new you appears. It's a new you, which is not based upon conditionality. It's not based upon a conditioned identity. It's not to do with I. So that what it would look like is that you would be completely at peace, nothing to do, no worries, no battle, no fighting, no tension, no kleshas, no disturbances. You'd be completely understanding. The nature of things would be plain to you. And of course, you'd be in a relationship with all things, a relationship of metta, or of compassion, or of faith. You'd come into that sort of direct connection with everything. You'd feel part of everything, that everything was part of you. So that would be what happened when it began to flower in you.
Well, it sounds wonderful, doesn't it?
Yes, doesn't it?
Like a vision.
Sure, it's not unfamiliar to you, Subhadramati. You have some intuition of it, yeah.
Well, that's interesting when you say the intuition of it, because what I wanted to ask you next, maybe going back to this this double model of the lotus unfolding, but yet also growing.
Yeah.
Do we have to wait for spiritual death? How do we practice spiritual rebirth? Do we have to wait until spiritual death has happened, until we've died spiritually, or how? What can we do? What can I do? What can we do?
Well, you could say there is a sort of path implied in the aspect of spiritual rebirth, and that path begins with feeling some definite connection with what embodies enlightenment. In other words, with the Buddha. So that you have some definite understanding of who the Buddha is, you have some real feeling for who the Buddha is, and some desire to draw closer to the Buddha. And that would express itself especially in bowing, you might say. This is just emblematic, but when you bow to the Buddha, you're taking the first step in spiritual rebirth. So you begin to form an imaginative connection with the Buddha. So the Buddha becomes part of your life. The Buddha or the Bodhisattvas or the Arahats, it doesn't matter which. They're all really aspects of the same reality. But you form some understanding, some connection with. So ideally, from the moment you step through the door of a Buddhist center and there's an image in front of you, and you begin to puzzle about who that is, and maybe even feel something towards that, and begin to understand what the figure means, and begin to have some sense of reverence, some admiration. Well, you've begun on the path, if you like, of spiritual rebirth. The next stage is where you really commit yourself to developing a deeper connection with the Buddha in whatever form, whether in a bodhisattva form or one of the much more archetypal Buddha forms, or a more literal historical form. But you begin to sort of take the Buddha as your ultimate teacher, as the teacher who stands behind your actual teacher, or probably the teacher who stands behind the teacher who stands behind your actual teacher. You decide that you're going to commit yourself to deepening that connection. And at this point, you may begin to actually practice formal meditation that deepens this kind of connection. So you'd begin by just putting the image of the Buddha in front of you, and with faith, with devotion, you'd enter into contemplation of that figure. But you become aware that that figure is sort of relating to you. There's a very striking experience when you set up a visualization. There's the Buddha sitting there, and of course the Buddha is looking at you. And you realize at a certain point that the Buddha is imaginatively looking at you. There's a consciousness way beyond your consciousness that is aware of you. And by now we're beginning to get a really strong sort of connection. And then you begin to experience blessings, which will often be symbolized by rays of light and mantras coming from the figure to you. And you'll feel that you're being transformed by those blessings. They're lifting you up. You are being raised to that level. You're beginning to experience yourself a little bit reborn. And then the next stage is where you dissolve that figure into yourself, so that the figure, what the figure represents, becomes a sort of permanent part of you. You carry it in your heart. And even the further stages involve, well, really completely dissolving the boundary between yourself and the Buddha, where you identify completely with the Buddha. And in some forms of meditation, you actually replace yourself with the Buddha imaginatively. And at this point, well, you're really going very deep into spiritual rebirth. So I've mapped out a sort of path, which is to some extent a formal path. But you set your, well, I was going to say you set your feet on that path, you set your head on that path when the first time you bow to the Buddha. When you bow before the Buddha, you're already on the path of spiritual rebirth, because you're connecting with the figure of the Buddha as the goal, what you will be, what you are going to become. And then you gradually close the gap. There are other ways of doing this, but if you're using the path of imagination, you close the gap by in the way that I've indicated. Yes, so from the very first time you come to the center and you begin to get some feeling for the Buddha, maybe before you came, you had that feeling. I certainly did. I read that Penguin book of Buddhist scriptures by Edward Conzer, and I immediately felt a connection with the Buddha and felt this was my teacher. And then I sought a physical teacher. So yes, that path begins when you form a connection with the Buddha, and that deepens, and you can systematically cultivate it to the point at which you really, well, become the Buddha. The boundary between you and the Buddha disappears temporarily and eventually fully.
Thank you. It's a sort of beautiful trajectory you've drawn out from us, for us, of the whole path. So I think what I'll do is I might just take us back and break it down. And the first question I want to ask you is, what happens if you fall at the first hurdle, as it were? For example, myself, I didn't want to bow to the Buddha when I first came to the center. I learned to meditate not in a little annex of the Buddhist center, in a rented room.
Right.
There was no shrine. Oh, there was just a flower and a stick of incense. And I didn't think it was a shrine. I thought the incense was to hide the smell of people's feet whenever they had their shoes off. And that's where I learned to meditate with Dharmarati, my first teacher. And then he said, come along to the Buddhist center. And I was very excited to learn more. But when I first saw the image of the Buddha, I was absolutely horrified. And I must confess, to my shame now, that I deliberately used to sit with my back to the image of the Buddha to sort of show my disapproval of this kind of, this image, because at the time I was breaking free from Catholicism. And
I was going to say, you wouldn't be a Catholic, would you?
Yeah, I certainly would. And I want to ask you more about that later. So some people, and including myself, I definitely didn't want to bow to the Buddha to begin with.
Yeah, well, I just say don't.
Okay.
Just don't. But a time came, I assume, when you did.
Yes.
And here you are. So I think that one shouldn't feel compelled to bow. And I always take great care to insist that don't bow if you don't want to. We don't want you to if you don't want to. I hope that's still stressed. But a time comes when you begin to actually feel something for the Buddha. You learn the mindfulness of breathing. Well, that practice was taught by the Buddha. the Metabhavana, that was taught by the Buddha. And so the teachings that you're hearing, the teachings about the lakshanas, about pratitya samuppada, conditionality, those come from the Buddha. So you begin to develop some feeling for him and some sense of his mind, his nature. So then you bow. So I don't think it's a question of falling at the first hurdle. Probably as an ex-Catholic, that was a pretty wise step to take. So that you were rejecting the view of the Buddha as the Lord of the universe in the sense of the judge. You were rejecting that, quite right too. But a point came when you felt you didn't need to reject that, and you could let yourself bow. Of course, you can reach enlightenment itself without bowing, but you can't reach enlightenment itself, I think, well, I'm sure, without having some definite sense of reverence, of devotion for what so vividly transcends you.
That's good. You've talked about in another one of your talks about that we need an object for our faith. If our faith doesn't have an object, then well, where is it to go? And you've even used the term, what is it again? Oh, the transcendental object as being an object for our faith.
Of course, as always, following Bhante in everything I say, it comes from Bhante ultimately. But I think the fact is that we are future-oriented beings, and we work towards things. It's part of what it is to be a human being with a mind that has constructed time and space. And so inevitably we think in terms of a future and of what we are going to do in the future. So you need some sort of idea of where you're headed. So that's one side of it. But the other side of it, I think, is very, very important. And Bhante has stressed this so much. I think that it's a natural part of human consciousness to look up, to revere. He says that of himself, that he naturally revered. And I know myself as a young man, I tried to revere in the Christian context. I couldn't do it, or rather it collapsed at a certain point. But I desperately wanted something to look up to, not in the merely, not very grown up way, looking for parents to look after you, but you wanted something that was really of value. You wanted something that embodied the highest values. And I think that is natural to being a human being, that within one there is an instinct to reverence. It's interesting, it's something that Dr. Ambedkar very strongly emphasized in India when he was encouraging people to leave their old religion, which was so much bound up with the caste system. But he very clearly said, human beings are made to revere. They're made to look up. It's part of a proper human consciousness. So I think this is very, very important. But I think our modern times have blunted that instinct to revere. It's a very famous occasion shortly after the Buddha's enlightenment, when he realized that there was nobody he could look up to because he transcended everybody else. So he said, well, he would live revering and relying upon the Dharma. And he said, not to revere is painful. So I think it's a natural part of human functioning to revere. And our modern times have so much emphasized the individual in an individualistic sense of the individual that we've lost that sense of reverence. Or many people have lost that sense of reverence. There are areas where people haven't. But it's a sad fact of this culture that we exist within, that we don't think in terms of something higher, something better. And we tend to look to, cynically look to debunk.
Well, I just wonder what we can do about that. I noticed myself, I've just been on solitary retreat, as I was telling you, and I noticed as the solitary retreat went on, I more and more wanted to bow to more and more things. I was bowing to the sea, I was bowing to the moon, and I felt that it
Yes.
felt like, oh, this does feel natural when one goes deeper. At
Yes.
the same time, I was recently in a study group, and I introduced this word reverence, Gaurava, the Buddhist word, and
Right.
immediately I felt the atmosphere tighten, like as if I'd, said something. There's something that, what am I trying to say? We can say, though, this might be a faculty we've lost, but
Yes.
you only know there's not a feeling for this as something we've lost.
Right.
People, there's almost a feeling like, don't tell me that I have to be reverent,
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Well, I think probably something that is useful to explore with people is who they've admired in their life, and to look at one's early heroes, and who one looked up to, however much we know now that they're not what they seem to be, and so on. But children naturally look up and admire. And I remember myself, having tremendous sort of hero worship of figures in novels that I read. And I'd been thinking quite a bit about the Greek myths and the Greek mythic history, as it were, and how much I sort of admired those superheroes. And there you are, superheroes. Even though, they're entertainment, does it not mean something that this is such a fashionable genre? That there's some sort of distant echo of admiration at this archetypal level. So I think it's a question of people sort of rediscovering that faculty within them, which they must have. They can't not have it. In order to be alive, to be human, they can't not have it. But maybe not to call it the faculty of reverence, but to sort of explore who you looked up to, who you admired. Well, what's the modern word? Your role models. But that's quite a limited term in a way. If you said the Buddha was your role model, it would really rather pull him down, but it's at least a way into the topic. So I think one would have to dig around in people's experience, and I'm sure that you would find individuals who they still did look up to, still did admire. I've been very struck, for instance, by the way people talk about Martin Luther King, black and white, and others. That is somebody who is unequivocally noble and good, and who fought the fight that needed to be fought with great courage, but at the same time without violence. Is somebody people really look up to, and he seems to have actually been like that. Of course, Dr. Ambedkar is the figure that I know best of that kind. Gandhi is quite widely admired in the West, although he perhaps is not quite the man who actually lived. But yes, there are heroes that we have, people we admire, and that then takes us into something further. What images really appeal to one? So a bit of sort of reverential historical investigation, I think.
So it sounds like you're saying, look for who we admire, and also recognize that faculty in ourselves that allows us to see, well, goodness, beauty, and truth when we see them. That faculty that if we pay attention to will sort of strengthen and sort of win out in a way over the other things like cynicism and all those blunting factors.
Yeah, absolutely, precisely that. That we have to sort of discover it within ourselves, because it is there. If it wasn't there, you just wouldn't be conscious. To have a human consciousness is to be have a sense of something beyond one, something higher that is extremely desirable. But you've got to discover it. And also you've got to work against the cynical, debunking, nihilistic tendency within one, which goes back to the question of views that we were talking about yesterday. But it's well put that you need to do the work to discover the faculty. Once you've found the faculty, you need to license that faculty, to value that faculty. It will do the rest. You see what I mean? You don't impose upon it. It's not something you can make happen. You can encourage, you can develop it. Bowing is a practice as well as an expression. But yes, if it's not already connected for you with, there's something within you, it won't take you very far.
Good. And then there's so much. I could talk about this subject all night, but
yes, indeed.
Slightly move on to something else I really, personally want to ask you, which is, it starts off with, this faculty that we cultivate. For Buddhists, the highest thing we can allow that faculty to respond to is the image of the Buddha or the archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas.
Right.
I just wanted to talk about these archetypal figures. Some of them are shown behind me. So I've always been used to, for many, many years, I was, when I was thinking, or if someone asked me about where do these figures, where are they, where do they come from? I imagined that what happened is the Buddha's disciples, after the Buddha passed away, meditating upon the Buddha, and the Buddha sort of growing brighter and brighter in their minds until he assumed a sort of archetypal nature. And that seemed to make sense to me, even sometimes the way I think of ordinary people. They can assume an archetypal nature. But then more recently, maybe about 5 years ago, I came across something in a seminar of Bante's, which I'd love to comb through. And he described these archetypal figures as like condensations of the absolute qualities of metta, of beauty, of truth. And I just thought that was just wonderful. It lit up my imagination, and still just the sense of them being this condensation of, you've already been talking about this week, of the nature of reality is metta. If that was condensed, Bhante said, it would be the figure of Amitabha. So are they the same or different, these two ways of thinking about the archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas?
Well, no, they're just different approaches to the same question. The point really is that the human mind is an image-making faculty. It naturally turns its ideas, if you want to call it that, its experiences into images. It's natural to us. Again, these are faculties that we already have. I mean, it's extraordinary. I was a little blown away by what I myself said about the in the meditation, that the screen is a metaphor. We have the metaphor of meeting. What a miracle! That you and I are meeting in the presence of, I don't know how many people, from Vancouver to Sweden to Australia, and we're having a real meeting, and yet it's all a metaphor, which is spun out of the pluses and minuses from an electronic field. And I'm straying out of my depth, but it's a miracle. And it's because we've got this faculty of imagination, which the mind actually is. The mind is imagination. So our minds create this situation. Yes, we get a bit of help from the electronic equipment, but so small what the electronic equipment provides. The rest of it's provided by us. And so it's the human mind naturally produces images that express experience. We do it in our dreams, with dreams from the most mundane, card indexing to working out our Oedipal complexes and so forth, to archetypal figures. I've had Buddhas and Bodhisattvas come to me in my dreams, ones I'd never encountered before. And I'm sure that's relatively common. So it's natural for the mind to translate experience into image. And then if you think that, that the Buddha realized the ultimate nature of things, he realized the Dhamma, if you like. But what he realized was not a principle. It wasn't a sort of statement, you know, the ultimate, you know, what is it? The answer is 42, wasn't it? The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The answer is 42 to the great question of life. It's not a postulate. It's not a philosophical theorem. It's something completely beyond all words, all expression, even all image. But it's the closest characteristic it has is that which is found in a human consciousness. It's as if the universe is more like a consciousness than anything else. Actually, it's more than a consciousness. It's supra-conscious. But the idea of a living consciousness gets us closer to reality than anything else. So when we begin to engage with reality, it naturally translates itself into images. And those images will be of idealized individuals, people.
Good, thank you. I know. I have to
In my
listen.
own mind, I don't know about yours.
Wow. Wow. We're going to have a little break in a minute, but I've got one more thing I want to explore. I want to respond to all that, and I want to ask you another thing. So I'm going to privilege asking you another thing. I think especially this came to mind because of this being such a significant time of Bante's anniversary. Well, what I wanted to ask you about was, well, my own experience, especially since Bante's died, before that as well, but especially since he's died, and I know it isn't just my own, many people's experience, is that Bante himself has become more and more the transcendental object. Bante himself is more and more that focus from my faith. I imagine him above my head every morning. I pray for his blessings to come. We pray for his will to be my will. So I just wanted to ask you, well, what you thought about that, about a living teacher being a historical teacher, as someone who did live, and by the mere fact of them being alive, they can't be perfect because they had to live and they had to die even on that level. Can a historical person become the transcendental object?
Yes, well, this is completely traditional. Certainly in the Vajrayana traditions, and even in some of the Far Eastern traditions, the founding figure becomes the sort of, well, the guru becomes the gateway to the transcendental, becomes the one who mediates between you and the Buddha. So I think this is a quite natural process. This doesn't mean neglecting the human imperfections, but it's just that one realizes that from one's own point of view, he represented something much more, which, because the human historical has been taken away, is much clearer and much less ambiguous. It's sort of dangerous to see your living teacher as an archetype, because then you fall into all sorts of confusions and delusions. But once he's safely dead, then, as it were, one can give oneself up to that perception, because, well, the reality is that I know about the Buddha because of Bante. Yes, I knew of the Buddha, but I actually came to encounter the Buddha through him. He introduced me in my ordination to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So for me, he's absolutely key in my imaginative connection with that dimension. And there's something about the removal of the historical body, which then frees you to simply regard him in that archetypal way. So I think it's a quite natural process. You don't have to do it. It won't work for everybody. I want to stress that. But for many of us, that will be the case, particularly those of us who were direct disciples of his, who knew him personally and sensed something of that extraordinary transcendent majesty in him, whilst at the same time he's a very ordinary and even slightly quirky personality with some blind spots maybe. But yes, once that person is safely dead, I'm using that phrase safely dead because he used it. He said that, Tibetans say that you can project the ultimate onto a figure, an image, a rupa, like the one you have behind you or the one up in the shrine room. You can project it onto an imagined figure, as you do in meditation, or you can translate it, project it onto a living human being. And he said he thought that better only to do that when that person was safely dead. And so Bhante is now safely dead. So we're not in danger of mixing up our idealization of him with maybe aspects of his which are merely his personality, maybe even weaknesses, and so on. He's safely dead, so we can just view him in that sort of way.
Good. That's really good. That's thank you. And thanks for all these all these responses, Subhuti. It's very, very rich. We're going to have a little break now. That'll be for 5 minutes. And then straight after the break, we're going to go into hopefully questions from people watching. That'll be for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have another little break, and then Subhuti is going to lead us in a ritual for Bhante. So that'll be our very special evening for this evening. So now it's just 10 to 8 UK time. So let's come back in 5 minutes at 5 to 8 UK time. Good. So see you all in 5 minutes.
Can you click by the mic possibly?
Good. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. Good. Good. Welcome back, Subhuti, and welcome back, everyone. So I just need to have the chat back on for me, and then I'll be able to see what questions. Great, good. So what we're going to do now is, so this is your chance to ask questions of Subhuti. Your last chance really is to ask questions of Subhuti in this series anyway, so don't hold back. So if you put your questions in the chat box, I'll read them out to Subhuti. So I should just lean forward to see them. Okay. Okay, so we have a question from Jane, who I think Jane's been here all week, Jane. So Jane, it's a big question by Jane's own admission, but we've been talking about spiritual rebirth, but what about actual rebirth? Why do Buddhists believe in rebirth? Well, maybe we should even say, do Buddhists believe in rebirth? But Jane says, why do Buddhists believe in rebirth? And what does that mean?
Well, it is a big question. The short answer is that it is certainly central to Buddhist teaching. And maybe not everybody who calls themselves a Buddhist believes in rebirth, but to me, it's difficult to understand what it would mean to be a Buddhist if you didn't believe in it, or at least give credence to it. At least be open to the possibility of it. So the Buddhist teaching is that we're born again and again, although strictly speaking, it's not we who are born again and again. There is a life that arises independence on this life, in accordance with the karma of this life, the actions that we perform in this life, the mental states that we develop, the overall current of our being, sets up an energy that finds new manifestation in a new life. So that is the teaching. If you want to know why one should even be interested in it, I suppose, first of all, if you're a Buddhist, the Buddha seems to have taught it, and it surely would be worth thinking about what the Buddha had to say. He didn't say anything that, without careful thought. And he seems to have taught from his own experience. He says that he had memory of past lives. It's one of the things that happened to him just before his enlightenment. He was able to review the whole sequence of his lives. This is what we're told. And it goes back right to the earliest tradition. No Buddhist tradition has ever denied rebirth. They've fought over much else, but not over that. But then there is some evidence. It's not conclusive evidence, but there has been a serious scientific inquiry into memories that children report of past lives. If you're interested in this, there's a very good book by Dr. Tucker called Return to Life. And he runs a unit at West Virginia University, which looks at paranormal experiences of all kinds, trying to subject them to as much of a rigorous scientific investigation as is possible. And he tells some fairly extraordinary stories. One of his most extraordinary involves a young lad from Glasgow. Subhadramati, you'll be pleased to hear. They're even reborn in Glasgow. And actually it's on YouTube. And there's a very good account of this. If you look at scientific evidence for rebirth on YouTube, you'll find an account by Dr. Tucker and another by Ian Stevenson, his mentor, who first began this sort of serious study. So it's not without some scientific evidence. Of course, it can't be reproduced under laboratory conditions or anything like that. But yes, Buddhists essentially believe in it because of the Buddha. But also, I would say, in my own meditative experience, I've touched on something about consciousness and I don't want to make great claims for my own abilities in meditation, but even as far as I've gone, I've experienced something about consciousness that makes the idea of consciousness ending, the flow of consciousness ending with physical death, ridiculous. So it's a matter in the end of faith in the Buddha, which doesn't mean that you say this is true, but you say I'm willing to work on the hypothesis that it is true. Then one can look at the scientific evidence such as it is, and one can then investigate one's own experience of consciousness. At the very least, I think if you're seriously engaging with Buddhism, you mustn't close your mind to it. If your mind is closed to it, you're really not engaging with Buddhism. You're engaging with a sort of materialist, melioristic philosophy, which is not a bad thing, but it's essentially humanistic rather than certainly Buddhist.
Thank you. Jane's just saying, could you say the name of the book again?
Return to Life,
okay.
by Dr. Jim Tucker. It's a very good book, nicely written, and it tells a few really good stories. There's another book called Old Souls. I can't remember the author there, but there's a little bit more of a strange interpretation there, a bit more Hindu, frankly. But I do recommend the YouTube pieces with Dr. Stevenson, Ian Stevenson, the scientific evidence for rebirth. You'll find under that heading an awful lot of really very weird stuff as well. But Dr. Stevenson is a serious scientist, is a psychologist, or was a psychologist. He's dead now. Well, he's back here somewhere.
Great, thank you, Subhuti. And there's just, I'm just going to say to everyone, we haven't got very many questions so far. So if you do take this chance to ask any questions about imagination, reverence, any of the things Subhuti's said. Well, we've got a couple of questions, and there's a follow-up question from Oliver, who's always very, very good for a question.
Yes, I've noticed.
Yes, a follow-up to just the rebirth question. Oliver saying, so if you don't reach enlightenment, do you just carry on being reborn?
Yes, because the energy of self-attachment is not discharged, if you see what I mean. So what keeps us being reborn is the fact that we believe very strongly that we are a separate individuality, and that that clinging is a kind of energy. Well, it is an energy which has to be discharged, and it discharges in a new life. So until you've resolved that finally and utterly, which is what you do in enlightenment, the whole cycle continues. Of course, according to the Mahayana tradition, there is the option that you choose to be reborn. And that's what the Bodhisattvas represent, those who've chosen to remain in cyclic existence in order to help others. Although strictly speaking, they're almost 99% enlightened, but they choose to continue to revolve in the cycles of rebirth in order to help others. But yeah, while that energy of clinging is not discharged, then you'll be reborn, and unless there is the energy of compassion to keep you there. I remember Bhante, about 6 or 7 years before he died, I went to see him one day, and he rather took my breath away. I was actually on my way to the LBC for a presidential visit, I remember. But he said something about finding this life, the word he used was disgusting. He found it unattractive, unappealing. This is not what he said. This is what I understood him to mean. I think he meant what in the spiral path is called nibbida, withdrawal. It no longer held any attractions for him. And he said, in fact, he was sort of looking forward to death. He was looking forward to being free from this world. And then he sort of stopped and kind of mused and said something, but there is rebirth. And I do believe in rebirth, and there is the Bodhisattva vow. And he took that vow, he took that Bodhisattva vow, and that vow is to continue one's efforts in the midst of humanity, in the midst of conscious beings, in order to work with them towards enlightenment. And so he gave expression very much to his belief in this perspective. I asked him, of course, where he was likely to be reborn, because you'd all blame me if I didn't. And he said he didn't have any ideas about that. But he thought that if it was to do with the laws of average, law of averages, which he said it probably isn't, he would be reborn either in India or in China. My Indian friends are delighted at this possibility.
Good, great, good. Good, thank you. Now the questions are now coming thicker and faster. So now we'll probably won't be able to do them all, but L. Pierce is asking, what happens between spiritual death and spiritual rebirth? Well, does something happen between spiritual death and spiritual rebirth?
Well, I think that strictly speaking, they're two sides of the same coin, if you see what I mean. As you can't in a way be, you can't in a way die spiritually unless you're being reborn. There's no spiritual bardo, to use the technical terms of the cycles of rebirth. So it's that you're able to die because you have a sense of something beyond self. And so when you do let go of self-clinging, then what you experience is, the glory of a new kind of consciousness, which is not based on I, or at least significantly less based on I, less selfish, in a word.
Good. Good. So there's two questions. I don't know if they actually go together, but I'm going to put them together. So one question, I can't remember who asked it, is if human race dies out, what would happen to enlightenment? And then the other question, which I'm going to pair with it, is what if everybody got enlightened? What would there still be consciousness?
Oh my goodness. These are grand questions, yes. Well, of course, the Buddhist teaching is that there are many, many, many different forms of consciousness. Even the traditional Buddhists would say there's many forms of consciousness all around us now. And because the Dharma is being taught, they'd say that that various sort of as it were, spiritual beings, not in the Dhammic sense, but in the sense of non-material beings, are attracted because they like situations that are bright and so forth. So the traditional teaching is that consciousness can take many, many different forms, some of which are those we experience, animals and insects and so forth, and some of them are immaterial that some people can experience, which some of us experience more as atmospheres and that sort of thing, but our world is only one section, as it were. This really all needs thinking about in the modern context, but this is the traditional teaching. There are multiple forms of consciousness, and traditionally it's said there are multiple universes, and that within those multiple universes are multiple different beings, some of whom are self-conscious and capable of developing enlightenment. In fact, the traditions, particularly the Mahayana tradition, says that there are many, many Buddhas appearing in many different realms of existence. So again, if we're taking Buddhism seriously, it's not just a question of thinking about ourselves as not bound by this life, but that we think that life itself is not bound by the material life that we know and understand. It's a bit difficult for us in the modern world because we've chased away the ancient spirits that Well, like the people around here, right very near here, there's a cairn, which was obviously a place of religious significance, where beings would have been felt. But we've lost that sense. I remember a Malaysian Chinese friend of mine telling me that in his village there were many spirits, and he himself experienced them. So I asked him, what about here? We were at Pamaloka at the time, and he said, no, there are none here. I think I blame Protestantism. I think that the Protestant Reformation chased away the magic from the universe. Anybody queue for a book, Religion and the Decline of Magic? Oh, what's his name? No, not Keith Richard, that's somebody else. I can't remember the name, but Religion and the Decline of Magic is a wonderful book, which details the way in which in Britain, the magic that was part of medieval Catholicism, which has even gone from modern Catholicism, was gradually eroded by Protestantism and then scientism. So we've lost contact with that, but the Buddhist world is full of life. There's consciousness everywhere. Everything is alive. And so it's inexhaustible. So in a sense, you could say there's the end state of the universe is unthinkable. Literally, it would be said achintya, which means unthinkable. So yes, there was a very happy thought that all beings have attained enlightenment in some mythic, infinite, distant future. Well, I suppose that it's certainly not that consciousness doesn't continue, but it doesn't continue in any way that we can imagine. The Buddha was asked this, does the Buddha exist after death or not, or both, or neither? And he said, none of those tell us, give us a proper answer. You have no idea what a Buddha is after death. So all we'd have to say really in answer to that question about the ultimate enlightenment of the entire universe is that we can't know what it would be like. But I'm sure it would be beyond wonderful.
Thank you very much. And I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time for questions. Oh. I'm sorry to everyone who has unanswered questions. I just encourage you to just keep tuning in to our live stream and keep asking questions. You can bring your questions back. I can see there's quite a lot of quite pressing ones now. Oh. But you can bring your questions back to any of our teaching sessions. So just encourage. Of course, we won't have Subhuti to answers, but we will do our best without him.
I'm sure you will. Yeah.
So now what we're going to do is we're going to have another little break, just again for 5 minutes, and then after that we're going to have our very, very special event for Subhuti with some special guests. We're going to have this ritual for Bhante to mark Bhante's 2nd anniversary. Subhuti will be leading it. There's other senior disciples of Bhante going to be joining us from all over the place, which I'm delighted, and taking part in the ritual. And I'm just going to ask the tech team, do people have to click on another link to go to this?
Yes, so there's going to be a different stream, and I'll share that.
Okay.
I'll share that in the chat now.
So in a minute, we're going to share in the chat the different stream, but don't cross over quite yet, because before you do that, as I was saying in the beginning, all this week we're passing a hat round, metaphorically speaking, for Subhuti and Subhuti's work. We are doing a huge dana appeal for Subhuti so that we can give Subhuti a gift that will mean he can carry on just doing what he does, which is sharing, outpouring the Dharma to centres all over the place, especially in India, in Hungary as well, here at the London Buddhist Centre. So we really just want to keep making that possible for Subhuti. So this is your last chance. I think this evening and over the rest of the weekend, we'll keep that link open to give to Subhuti. So that's been posted up now. And yeah, let's give lots to Subhuti. I thought he is allowed to buy some DVDs with some of it as well, because I know he likes him so much. So let's make this very special collection. And now we're also going to post the other link for the ritual, which will start in 5 minutes. So do join us for that. And yeah, if you've got a shrine at home, I'd really encourage you to light your shrine and get everything ready for this very special ritual. If you haven't, then there's the shrine here and Subhuti's shrine. So see you in 5 minutes. That'll be 8:20 UK time.
Thank you.